here today with Ed Nzambi, and he has a wealth of experience from Fortune 500 tech companies to being an entrepreneur to a professor, even around the topic of value consulting, also known sometimes as value engineering. So, Ed, if you can share with the audience some great parts of your background and what brought you here today.
Sure, Marva. Thank you so much for having me. So that is one of the unique things that has kind of grown me as an individual, but also as a professional. There has been a diverse set of consumers, if you will, that I have served. I have been a faculty member at a university, College of Nursing, for 5 years. So my consumers or my customers at that time were young people. I can say that now, but that were trying to learn something that I could impart on them and that we could learn together. But I've also worked in the private sector. My own company that I had allowed me to provide services to, for example, the Air Force, the White House, as a directly. And then, of course, there's been various companies that are vendors. They're Fortune 500s, HP, for example, Unisys, Cisco. These companies have provided, again, a breadth of knowledge and exposure that I by myself could not have gone out and gotten. So collectively, I've gotten different customer bases that all require value from me and from the services I provide. And that variation is what allows me to become very, very fluid in how I provide business value consulting and engineering.
So, it sounds like you have a combination of articulating complex information, listening, technical, as well as science. What about math? Do you have that financial background and how did you acquire that acumen?
So it's funny you would say that, Marva. It's a great observation. That is actually correct. The finance is math. Math is a common denominator across all of these.
Right.
Even when we're in college, there is math that we apply to different courses. And so the relationship with the topic and what math was applicable is still something that I carry on because you have to realize that business value consultants also create assessments. In
Hmm.
order to create an assessment, you must know what is the measure unit, what is the value um, activity. And so there are always units. They may not be dollars. Financial is always dollars. But at the end of the day, there are units. There are gigabytes that we have to measure, right? So there are seconds. All of these are numbers. So ultimately, the common denominator is math, whether it's financial or applied to another sectors such as education or even the military. There is absolutely a common shared requirement for us to be able to measure. And with that comes units. Really great point and observation, Mark. Um, my background actually began in academics, and my degrees, including graduate degrees, are in science. And they were more so in biological sciences, medical sciences, and so forth. But as life would have it, as I transitioned into fatherhood and taking care of family, there was an opportunity to work in IT. And when I did that, I found that applying the scientific method actually was a really strong position and value. Again, using the word value now, but certainly it was a strong value to whomever I was working for and with.
And one of my favorite questions to ask people is what lights you up? So, why is this a passion for you?
Well, like many people, when you have an aptitude or you're able to do something well, it encourages you to do this. I myself am driven by a dedication and almost a healthy fear in making sure that the services that I provide are really, really to the best of my ability. In many cases, the things that I do, such as working with the military, uh, most people don't realize that many of us in this industry have family members in the military. And so when we're doing things for the military, there is also a sense of responsibility that is just driving you to make sure they stay well, they get the best services they can. And that pours into pretty much everything else that I do because I'm really passionate about finding the solution so that the customer can feel well, can feel safe, and can get what they want out of spending time with me. You know?
And safety is a word that we really talked about before. So tell me more about the word safety, because I believe your daughter, I believe, is in the military, speaking STEM careers. Tell us more about that.
Well, that is certainly one example, right? So, with having family members and a daughter, there is always a sense of keeping them safe. And what that translates to in your job is, first of all, you're only one of many people that provide the end result that we see. So, the military protects us, and I'm very grateful for my daughter's commitment to that service. The military protects us, but they protect us by having certain capabilities. I have to make sure those capabilities, whether they're communication or weaponry, is available to them. But at the same time, that's safety. There are so many protocols that require when they are dispatched, when they are returned, right? And when they communicate to move out of harm's way. There is, believe it or not, a part of our job that may literally touch on that. You may be responsible for putting somebody on the grid and then taking them off the grid, and that keeps them safe. So it's a passion that is driven by very specific examples that I want to keep people safe, but I also want to enable them in doing their best job as well. The most important thing I think that you alluded to was the positions that I hold. I've always envisioned as a position of service. No matter the title and for whom I was working, there is a service. And with that service, I'm just one individual that makes a ecosystem of support, an ecosystem of delivery, whether it's for that product or service. So even though I've had a very amount of experience in different government agencies and different government sectors uh, areas, they all have to do with me providing the best that I can do in conjunction with the other players, if you will, or the broader ecosystem.
And how do you help people visualize success? That's one really core skill of value consulting is you actually help people understand what success could be and helping them think big. How have you done that?
So that's a good question because depending on whether you're working in the commercial sector, which I've also had a prior experience, right? So I worked in both commercial and public sector. In each case, it's very important to define the underlying value. And again, the customer defines it. So, for example, at the highest level in the commercial space, making money or saving money is a very defining goal. So all the activities that you may be supporting have to lead to making money or saving money. Where so in the public sector, it is not as much as a pivot point to make money or save money, more so ensuring that we have capabilities and saving time. So those two distinguishers are the highest level that I can recommend when you're looking across commercial versus public sector in terms of what is value. And then you have to deep dive into the individual agency, the individual company desires.
As working as part of a team, where would you insert this thought process in the discovery process during the sales cycle after they're a client? What walk us through where you would insert this and what the benefits are to each area?
So, from a sales perspective, I would have to say you want to include this thought process in every single section of that, right? So, when you're preliminarily doing discovery, you're actually actively gathering requirements. You're gathering an understanding of what the customer value is. You don't do that at the end when you've sold them the product, right? So, at the very beginning, you have to have conversations, discovery, and that mindset that we're talking about has to be there.
And
What is it?
how does that work? If I'm not your customer and you're
Mhm.
going to ask me all these questions, why would I share my secrets with you and my, or my data? So how do you balance that with discovery? What do you do differently when we don't have a relationship? I just met you.
So the discovery is really understanding that fundamentally you're there to serve them. So it's not so much asking multiple questions, but listening for what they are providing as answers or their needs. So you really want to be attentive to what is their pain point, what is their goal. They're not always the same thing. There's not always a pain point, but there's certainly always a desire if you're gotten the audience to be able to optimize or improve their status. So what you're listening for is how do you optimize, how do you improve their status in the conversation versus providing more input about your product and service without that relationship, right?
That makes sense. And how have you coached the sales teams? Because a lot of the sales teams are like, stay away from my customer, and then vice versa. A lot of the companies that you've worked for, your skill set is highly, highly valued. And a lot of the teams are like, hey, I'm just going to throw as many people at this opportunity as I can because then I'll have the best chance. And obviously, you have to pick and choose your highest quality opportunities and relationships. So how do you do that balance and what does that look like? That's selling internally and prioritizing internally.
So, for the most part, I've been very fortunate. Most of the teams that I work with understand the value of what consulting and business value consulting provides. And what I mean by that, though, is it may not be initially for every single one of those teammates, but at some point during their experience with me and other value consultants, they realize that value is a measured quality. It's not an elbow feeling. So
Right.
this is where that science and data driven decision making comes into play. You're adding and contributing to the team by providing data points that validate the customer's value and not so much, oh, I have a good feeling that you could use this, or I have a good feeling that you're doing well with our product and service. So once the teams understand that you have a measurable, repeatable process to quantify all of these various customers and their various needs, they actually embrace that and are really able to bring you in, like I said, across the life cycle in terms of what the support they actually need.
And what about when you're working with these sales teams and they say, that sounds great, Ed, but you know what? I got to close this quarter, and this is going to take a lot of extra time. And so they're really thinking about how can I close something faster. But meanwhile, some of the leading indicators their company might be looking at is the increase in deal size and the long-term value of a customer. So how do you balance this, need like, hey, I got to close something this quarter to the other really more important metrics of the bigger company, which is the longer value of the customer. So what would you say to that idea?
So, first of all, I have to be introspective in that at the end of the day, I'm usually there to support that close. So if we're at the end of the quarter, my job is to implement and support any efforts that will actually close the deal. However, along the way, this is really educational. I think many of the people that work with me and other business consultants understand that we don't have a single deliverable. There are multiple deliverables that we can provide. So, back to your point about the sales cycle and how they measure our value in terms of this could take so long or this could take so short. Our deliverables vary. Sometimes they're a business case, which is one of the broader ones that includes metrics, includes requirements, use cases, etc. Or it could just be a brief, right? So you're just briefing them on either the status of a technical test or you're briefing them on the capabilities of your products and services. So the length of the deliverables that we provide varies, but always they have to be aligned to moving that account or that opportunity forward.
What do the customers appreciate most about your business cases? I mean, I know when I worked with you, I would see business cases that literally looked like they came out from a big, six consulting firm, and obviously with your professor abilities to articulate it in a way that can create a broader audience buy-in. Like, what is the skill set of the people you're working with, and how do they react, and how do they use these business cases you come up with?
So I think ultimately you have to have an understanding of the human condition. Everybody that is a consumer, and that's what I mean by human condition, wants to feel like they paid for or they received something that is of value to them.
Yeah.
Again, the paradigm that understand that value is defined by that customer. But at the end of the day, the brevity of what we can provide is very important, especially with executives. We're not looking for 60, 70 slides on a topic. They're very, very succinct, as are most of our customers because they're very savvy. They want to know what can you do for me? When can you do it? What's it going to cost? That level of brevity has to be packaged in a way that it is validated or supported by data. And that's what I provide. That science background dictates that I be succinct in saying, this is the quantifiable benefit. And then ultimately, it's up to the consumer or the customer to decide. But you're going to give them data and your best recommendation so that they can make that educated decision.
I love that. One area that I was always so just interested in was the whole benchmarking area. And this is where I would get into debates with people, because if you're the Army, you don't want to know what the Navy's doing. Or if you're XYZ Bank from the East Coast, you don't want to know what XYZ Bank from the West Coast is doing. But you might want to know what XYZ retailer that has the same amount of employees or customers has. So that whole argument of, no, retailer wants to know what the other retailer, their competitor, is doing. I found that that wasn't true at all. But some people would literally, it was a professional debate. So I'm so curious, on your reaction to kind of, when you talk about, hey, this is what you're doing, this is what your competitor's doing, versus someone that they actually do benchmark themselves against, and what kind of reactions and dialogue that creates.
So, very rarely do I run into a competitive um, use case. It does happen. It happens frequently, but it
Hmm.
is not the mainstay of my work. What I would say though is you have to realize that whether it's a competitor, your internal group, there's a common denominator here. You have to understand, and this is where we start leaning into how technical are business value consultants. At the end of the day, there is a level of technical knowledge you have to have about your customer. What do I mean? At the end of the day, we're looking at IT architecture. What they have as a common denominator is infrastructure. Again, the paradigms that we hear often in IT: people, tools, and process. They all have that in common. What you're doing is differentiated what is applicable to your particular customer from what they may be trying to compare with their competitors. There may not be a comparison, there may not be a value proposition, and that's what we provide, right? Is the analysis, unbiasedly, if you will, side by side of the competitor capability versus your capability, the competitor's cost versus your cost, and again, the overall benefits and pros and cons that are associated with either. So it's very important to remember that we're still working with common denominators, the common denominators being people, process, and technology. It exists in each one of these, and just being able to compare them in an unbiased way is what gives us an opportunity to provide our insight and recommendation.
So I love that. So you're extracting it a layer from the vertical and industry they're in, and you're saying, hey, this is the common denominator everyone has. And so you look at it from that lens. That's a really great idea. So, what challenges have you had either with customers and users, business partners? Maybe you had some big consultants already within the company, or internally. Sometimes you might have challenges. If you could kind of walk us through what challenges and how did you overcome them, or what did you learn?
So I would use perhaps a variation on the word challenges. I think there's opportunity, and the reason for that is we have two constant variables in providing business value consulting, regardless of the industry. So, again, value consulting's been around for a long, long time. It's not just applicable to IT, it's applicable to multiple sectors and industries. But what they have in common here, and I'm always making this analysis that says what is in common, because what in common is actually foundational, right? Everyone's battling time. If we had more time, we'd figure it out. You've heard that out. If we had more time, we could actually make up more solutions and test more solutions. The
Right.
reality is, time is a variable that no one controls and it waits for none of us. So, that is definitely an opportunity to quickly come up with this succinct what will work, what will get the customer where they need to be, and perhaps scale them as well. The other opportunity is the fact that we are still evolving, especially in IT. With the advent of AI in the early 1950s, we're looking at how quickly can we learn and baseline, to your point, some of the activities, because those baseline activities become the variables that machine learning in particular takes and is able to utilize in making decisions and doing outcomes. So time is an opportunity, but it's an opportunity in the sense that it's a challenge. We've got to move quickly, we've got to move efficiently. And two, there is continual raising, there is continual evolution of technology. And as such, not only do we have to keep pace with our understanding of it, we have to quantify what is value so that there are still standards, there are still assessments that are utilized in our space. Yeah.
That's so helpful. So let's walk through kind of a tutorial on what actually is value consulting, and let's shape it into the SaaS model. Although you could, as you said, use it for multiple industries, but if you kind of walk us through maybe the top three or top five areas that someone should know about value consulting.
So let's start with the foundational pillar. The customer defines value. But value defined as it stands on its own is not the realization of value. So if there was an equation that equaled productivity, equaled excellence in our field, it would be taking the value, adding the activities that make that value, specific value, a realization. So value realization is actually the goal. That's how we measure success in business value consulting, right? And it's literally an equation. First, identify the value, but then you have to put into play another word that we could use for the activities is enablement. You have to enable that in order to get the outcomes that the customer is equating with seeing or measuring value, right? So that equation is applicable to any industry and anyone doing value consulting.
How should teams think about investing in value consulting? So pretend I'm a SaaS startup and I keep hearing about this value consulting. We need a value consulting team. What would you say to the executive leadership team of when you should acquire this skill set and when should you put it into your organization, and how should you invest? Should the customers pay for it, or should it be part of your sales process and sales team?
So I'm going to be a little forward leaning in my answer here. With artificial intelligence, you have to realize that the variables that are used to model the actual capabilities of the different AI types are the same activities that the value business consultant measures. So there are data points that come in that we equate with this is a good threshold, or if this data point comes in, this is an indication of a cyber attack, or this is an indication of a failure. Those variables are not random. They are things that we, as business value consultants, innately look for as a variable, right? We're looking at the zeros and ones, and others are just perhaps just seeing a zero or no numbers at all. But my point is, you have to have value consultants on board early and throughout the evolution, because the reality is, if you're not aware that we are providing guidance and the structure for coding, right, in the use cases, because we're data driven, we are measurement driven. So it's not just random use cases that are put together when artificial intelligence is standardized to be doing outcomes or even doing compliance. So you want to have that capable insight and that capability to be able to direct and hone your company or your mission objectives.
I love that. And I know, I had value consulting working for me when I was at IBM, and then I had it as a skill set that was offered to my team when I was at a Splunk. And what was so interesting is in both cases, it was a different process. But when the value consulting people, like you said, could find those patterns of repeatability and circle that back and get that into product marketing and even some of the developers, that was the synergy. But in some companies that I was in, it really that communication did not exist. The respect didn't exist. It was very, very challenging. So what would your advice be to people that are here in value consulting, or if we have people from marketing or product development on this call?
So it's perhaps a new talk track for many, because as I said, it's not a plug and play type of service. It really requires to get into the customer area, understand what the wickets are, what are the requirements, what are the activities to change. So if the paradigm shift or the change in the talk track is available and people are receptive to the fact that we're looking at variables. We're not looking at just, oh, I feel like this is valuable. That is going to really allow you to do something that is very important. A lot of standardization, a lot of baselining. And as I said, artificial intelligence is my forward leaning example. You really need to be able to see within all of this quagmire, what are the activities? What are the variables? What are the data points that are being ingested and need to be ingested to consistently provide value or the outcome as we have in programming, even for AI? So it's a matter of people accepting of being able to realize that that's what we're doing, and it's not just measuring numbers in terms of it costs you more to do something, right? It's got a little more to do with the other variables that add up to why does it cost you more? And if it's not cost, is it time saving, as I alluded to earlier? Because the driving factors or the driving goals for each consumer is not always make more money. It is more so managing the money that they've been given in a budget to be able to justify the outcomes and be able to talk to and validate that they have used that money properly for whomever is their consumer.
I love that. It's so helpful. So, speaking of helpful, we have a lot of newer entrants on our call. They're maybe early career, and so we've talked a lot. We've used a lot of terms. So, when you say use cases, can you really articulate what that looks like, especially in SaaS sales, like how that's shaped? That would be very helpful.
Sure. So use cases are a set of examples that we've basically put a beginning and an end to. So a use case can be where someone is calling a service desk center, right? And there has to be a resolution to that call. So a person calls in and says, I'm not able to use my email. They're talking to a representative at that point because they couldn't email the representative, right? So they're talking. That representative has to begin some type of action to resolve. But with that resolution may be the verification process. So that representative now verifies or duplicates the customer transaction to see that they cannot access their email or the email server is not releasing the data or the email as we know it. Then they have to either fix the problem directly if they have access to the server or engage the person that can, in the simplest sense, reboot that server so that it now starts working. That is a captioned beginning to end use case, right? And so all the variables that I said inside of it are the variables that I'm always saying not only make up how we increase efficiencies in business value consulting, but how AI would play a role in automating any part of that to make it repeatable and make it efficient.
So what also surprises me that customers will say, "Oh, Ed, I know my process. We do these, 10 steps to resolve a customer call." And what I always have appreciated about value consulting is you're actually doing interviews, like real face-to-face interviews, sitting with the people. And it amazes me of how companies they've never done that. So what surprised you? I know for me, I vividly remember I was in a call center and they literally had their whatever their process was and they were using the big ServiceNow and all the applications, but they literally had 8 other screens of other tools they were using that no one even knew about, and physical manuals, and then they had their phones, and they were doing all kinds of things that I'm not really sure management knew about. And it wasn't that they were doing something wrong, but back to your idea about time, it was a waste of time, and they were doing things one-offs, and there was no real knowledge base or consistent learning. So I'm just curious, like when you've had these sit-down conversations, tell us 1 or 2 kind of anecdotal stories. You don't have to share anything confidential, but just 1 or 2 anecdotal stories so people really get a gist of what you can uncover when you have these conversations.
So you make a good point about access to the actual customer environment or processes. It is important to walk through, and that's why there are classifications within security where you can work. So if you have security clearance, you can go into an environment where you will be exposed to or have access to the actual process as you've described it, right? So that keeping that in mind, in either case, being able to step into and literally end to end do the process of how does this get done or what happened in this situation. And you're literally, as you're seeing it, looking at each step in that process. That is what allows you in any scenario to define what pieces can be automated, if any, what pieces need to not exist. You may have duplication in an effort, whether they're checking a tool and then checking another tool. And so there's opportunity to consolidate activities, consolidate dashboards, right? And that's what you're now recommending or providing as a solution. So going in to any environment, it's always actually interesting to understand the effort that people are putting into to actually provide their own service, right, to their end users. But if you take the time to go step by step together, most often together, you find that there are areas that can be more efficient, there are areas that can be eliminated, and there's a degree of satisfaction that you get from that. It's almost like, oh, wow, look what we found out, when in fact, if you hadn't come along, they may not have took the drudgery of actually going step by step on the process and just go, hey, when we do this, it always breaks. When in reality, it's when you do this and then you do this, it breaks, right? So it's really fascinating to work with customers. And there's a degree of satisfaction on our end, but also on their end as you kind of parse out what really is the solution.
We talked about the word time. I'm going to add 2 words: trust and change. So would your reactions be to those 2 words in the field that you're in?
Well, when you say trust, it is a privileged position to be a consultant, period. Uh, for me, it's always been a fiduciary duty, meaning I have to give the best solution, the best evaluation that I can. And as you do that, you build trust. There has to be a dual trust, right? The consumer must trust you, but you must trust that they're also giving you an unbiased feedback on what is working and what is not, right? So that's trust, because fundamentally in any relationship there has to be a degree of trust in order to be foundational in what you're going to accomplish together, right? So that's the trust part. But you had another part you were asking about. Time? Is that what you said?
Change.
Oh, change. Change. Well, we know how this goes. Change is part of existence. And I hate to be so quintessential about it, but at the end of the day, what we're talking about is there is going to be change. I like to think of it more as we're going to help with adaptation. It's adaptation that allows you to survive and exist beyond the change. So change is inevitable. There is always change because time is not stopping, right? But what we want to do is decide what are our adaptation methodologies, what are our adaptation options in order to continue to succeed. I'm replacing the word survive with succeed and flourish. So a lot of forward thinking happens with change, and not everyone can see beyond step one. But again, going back to what we discussed, if you look at an end-to-end process, you're going to see that there's going to be change or could be change along that. What is the impact of that change? What is the value outcomes that come from augmenting that overall process and the steps in it?
I love what you just said. So we have time, change, survive, and thrive. So let's leave our listeners. So survive and thrive. Where would you what do you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think that was a good segue that we just discussed with the fact that there is perpetual change. There is evolution in any perspective that you look at it. In your work, there is evolution. And I'm going to go back to the AI piece only because it's so prevalent right now. It is something that, whether you're aware of it or not, it exists in so many areas of our lives, including anything that can take in a data input. It is capable of taking that data and combining that data, or just taking large language models and reciprocating immediately something that you ask for, right? So, with change in its simplest sense, we must become more adaptive in our thinking in that there needs to be compliance as well. So the ability to automate something to do something may not necessarily be as efficient or as safe without also programming compliance in that. So that's an example of adaptation as we rapidly move into all these things that we're seeing AI being able to do. AI in the sense that these are machines, these is code, this is software that can do things with limited or no input from a user. And so we have to really keep our minds open to how do we need to adapt that solution versus let it run its course in the evolutionary world that we're living.
So pretend that one of your customers was listening to you today. What would you say to them about value and what they should be thinking about?
So I think they embrace the the pillar that says that value is determined by them. Unfortunately, many times they fight for that, and they don't need to. If you're dealing with a classically trained business value consultant, We already know that we're listening for them to tell us what is valuable. They don't have to foot stomp and say, "You're not listening to me," or "This is what's important. Don't try and sell me something," is often said, right? So, first start there that if you have found a consulting group individual that, first of all, understands that you are determining the value and defining value, you have a great starting point because ultimately that trust over time will allow you both to work together to adapt and thrive as we evolve.
Thank you so much, Ed, for sharing your wisdom. So, we really talked a lot about value, time, and how to adapt and thrive. Is there any other lessons you want to leave the audience with today?
So I think at the end of the day, if an audience from a consumer point of view can embrace that the people that we are working with, the business consultants, understand that we, the consumer, we, the customer, define what is value. It puts us at ease and it allows us to work better with understanding that they are literally looking for variables. They're not just thinking that they can give you a great answer because I have found many times that we are an unbiased party. We will do the quantification, and if the quantification says this is not a good option, that is what we have to unbiasedly present. So it's a very unique occupation where the reality is you're doing quantification and evaluations, and the outcome and the results of that are what they are from a scientific point of view. But if we work together, I am sure we can continue to adapt and thrive in this evolution that is occurring across all these industries.
Thank you so much for your time, Ed. This has been incredible for both your customers and people whose careers, and you're really adding a lot to the team. We really enjoyed talking to you. And
My
where should
pleasure.
people, if people want to learn more about you or work with you, where should they reach you?
I think LinkedIn is where I can be most easily found and consistently found. So reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Sounds great. Well, make it a great day and let's keep thriving.
Okay. Thank you so much, Marva.
Cheers.
Cheers.